So Circle built CCTP because there was no solution at the time. NTT, what Wormhole has at standard, is literally CCTP, because we ideated with them, literally CCTP for any asset.
That's Robinson Burkey, co-founder of Wormhole, a startup he describes as the wire transfer system for blockchains. Wormhole's critical infrastructure powers nearly 50% of all stablecoin transfers between chains. While companies like Circle built custom transfer systems in-house, Wormhole offers an open standard any stablecoin can use to go multi-chain from day one, making it the foundation for stablecoins to actually replace a lot of the banking payment rails. Here's our conversation with Robinson Burkey. Season 4 of Stableminded is powered by M0, the stablecoin platform for builders. M0 recently crossed 230 million in native stablecoins minted, helping builders turn payments from a cost center into a core revenue center. This season, we dive into how companies like Cast, Playtron, Wormhole, and others fit into this dynamic ecosystem. With M extensions, builders can fully customize their stablecoin programs. And with their orchestration APIs, builders can scale minting and redemption freely. Tune into episode 1 of this season to meet Luca and Greg, co-founders of M0. Stableminded is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.
Hi, Robinson. Thank you so much for joining us. How's it going?
It's going well. Just another day in the life of grinding, as we were actually talking about before we kind of got on this podcast. It's a never-ending hustle of ups and downs.
It's a fun one, though. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in New York, and I would argue is becoming, this may be polarizing, but I think it's becoming the center of crypto, at least in the near to medium term. Who knows long term, but I think it's increasingly becoming more and more of a popular place for builders, especially as crypto's kind of one of the main use cases is really an alternate financial system. New York is one of the capitals of finance of the world, so it just has this natural fit. So anyway, long answer is I'm calling it from New York City today.
Yeah, well, I know we have a ton of New York listeners. I'm not in New York, but I go there often just in this role. I tend to agree. I do feel like there's a huge nucleus that is starting to form. When do you think that actually began to solidify, like Web3, stablecoins, crypto centered in that area of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe to just give a bit of an analogy of like what I feel like New York is right now. It's as someone who was working in Silicon Valley before and kind of coming from a background of working in high growth, fast paced startups. It's very much kind of reminiscent of the Web 2 kind of hockey stick motion that I felt being in Silicon Valley and in kind of the early 2010s, mid 2010s. Obviously, COVID really changed things for San Francisco and in the broader Bay Area, but that's kind of how I feel like it is for crypto now. I mean, for a lot of people talk to you and say, crypto has a lot of use cases, the world computer, decentralized compute, you can build anything on top of that. I don't disagree. I think maybe we could have a conversation about what the time horizon of that is. But what I think that crypto is really good for and what we focus on a lot at Wormhole, and I personally focus on a lot on is what I just said before, this idea of an alternate financial system. And New York is, like I said, one of the financial capitals of the world. So it just lends itself well. You already have this talent. A lot of why the Bay Area and Silicon Valley became so popular for tech early on is because you have these like brain drains, right? You have Stanford, you have Berkeley, these other schools. In New York, you have a lot of talent that's kind of already here specific to finance. So the actual transition is quite easy. And so I think we're starting to see that move more and more in this direction. I think we could argue up and down about whether the current administration's been net positive or net negative for crypto. But I think one thing you could say is that building in the US feels a lot more okay. And we're starting to see more and more companies want to be near other companies, right? More L1s, more DeFi protocols, et cetera. And New York seems to be the spot for that.
Yeah, man. I love the take. And it is interesting to think about pre-Silicon Valley, like what was the environment that was existing before when a lot of those big companies in the 90s probably drew a ton of people in, students that positioned the 2000s Silicon Valley drain into what we know as like social media tech, big internet platforms. It's an interesting comparison to finance in New York. I haven't really thought much about it, but before we get too deep, why don't we just start with your introduction on your role at Wormhole. I know you guys I was looking at, celebrated really a year plus now into the journey. I think a lot of people from this conversation and just how we frame this conversation a little bit is for us really focused on stablecoins and the relationships of stablecoins that Wormhole has. Some founders we talk to are only building in that space. Other founders are doing way more stuff in and around Web3 and crypto. I think you guys probably fall into that bucket. So yeah, why don't we start with an intro and then we can dive deeper.
Yeah, for sure. I've been in crypto for about 5 years now, professionally, personally. It depends on what your pill moment is. Bought a fake ID with Bitcoin, like have one of those stories, right? But startups, I was at DoorDash leading a lot of the new vertical efforts for about 4.5 years. And Wormhole's actually been around for a little over 4 years. We celebrated our 1-year token launch anniversary. So it's been 1 year since we launched the W token, which is the utility and governance of the protocol. But Wormhole, I would say maybe I'll give two audiences definitions for two different audiences. So the classic Thanksgiving table definition is we've built the wire transfer for blockchains. So you have all these different banks in the world today. These banks don't talk to each other. They have different databases. They're entirely different systems. And they need one common way to communicate so you can send money between Alice and Bob or between Drew and Robinson. And one of the bigger ways in which you can do that is Swift. So Swift is essentially just almost like an accounting system, right? It's a message saying Drew sent this much to Robinson, and I may have a bank in the US and Drew may have a bank in Spain, or it can be in the US as well, right? Two different banks. So we've built the wire transfer system for blockchains. That's your kind of Thanksgiving definition. But if we get just a little bit more technical, Wormhole is what we would call an interoperability protocol. So the concept of interoperability is not new. It's definitely a mouthful, but it's just the idea of different systems interoperating with one another. So banking systems and wire transfers is a good example. Interoperability can actually be used to describe let's say the metro system or public transportation system and how it works together. We just took that term and we applied it to blockchains. Because what happened was we started with a few, and then we got more and we got more, and they got more complex, and we got different virtual machines. And now we have, there's probably 15 that do a lot of volume and activity, but there's hundreds out there, right? And so Wormhole exists to connect, to be this kind of unified connectivity layer between all of these chains. And really kind of the purpose, the main product market fit Wormhole has is we are sending messages, so just data, but you use that to then send assets. So stable coins are probably one of our largest focus, because that's probably one of the biggest assets or stores of value that move across chain. Then you can send any arbitrary asset across Wormhole, right? So we've helped over 4,500 assets issue multi-chain, and we work with the big institutions today, all the way down to the meme coins, right? It could be Doge, it can be any meme coin that came from the most recent meme coin craze this past year.
That's cool. So you're feeling like, I guess when it comes to stablecoins and that routing volume and that system that you're building, how do you think about stablecoins? Was this always something that you kind of knew was coming in this journey as you built this, or has this been like, holy crap, like we didn't really expect to be leveraged in this way? Which one does it feel like, or maybe in the middle?
Yeah, I think when building a lot of things, sometimes people over-index a little bit or under-index a little bit on the luck aspect. I definitely don't think there was a lot of luck. I think it's success is usually a combination of a number of factors, and there's a small luck factor. But I'll give the context as to why I'm saying that. Is when we originally started Wormhole, it started back actually, like I said, about 4 years ago. The idea was that there was really just kind of like two main chains at the time. And the idea that there would be multiple blockchains and that crypto itself would be largely across, maybe you could argue 20 today, 25 today, but like increasingly, there are more and more. That general idea was so foreign. The idea that like multi-chain versus everything settles to Ethereum was like a huge fight on crypto Twitter for not just like 3 months. It was like a huge fight for like, I feel like all of probably around 2020, 2021. And so back then we were so far from even thinking about stablecoins riding these rails. We were like worried about, will there actually be this kind of like inter-blockchain system? Thankfully, things played out in that way. Even things that settle to Ethereum need interoperability, whether it's the native bridge, if you will, or just going between the L2s. So they're just to kind of like level set stablecoins. We even had worries before, thinking about, will stablecoins have kind of product market fit? I would say Fast forward a few years, obviously Circle got heavily involved. We worked close with them to help build some of the CCTP related stuff or help ideate with them as we're thought partner with them and some of their interoperability. And then we started just to see stablecoins kind of take off. You also had that period of time where everyone thought Bitcoin would be used for payments, right? And I think still some people would argue that Bitcoin should be used for payments, some of the maxis out there, but there was this idea that Bitcoin would be used for payments, and there's a number of reasons why that wouldn't work. It's extremely volatile, Bitcoin's too slow, it obviously could never work. And so I think
it's like contrary, like a store of value, like for people who really believe in Bitcoin and what it is, it's like, do you really want to be spending it? That's also kind of an interesting question, you know?
I always think about the lens through like, what am I doing as a user, right? Like, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin. I'm going to hold my Bitcoin. And so it becomes a really good collateral asset for maybe something like a stable coin that you can spend, right? And long story short, as we started to grow, we started to see more and more of our volume was actually, it still is a lot of these like large native gas tokens like ETH, Sol, SUI, Vera, insert your large chain token and DeFi protocol tokens. But more and more we started to see stablecoins. And I think stablecoins today probably do something like close to 50% of all the volume that goes through Wormhole. That's kind of a finger in the air number, but I know it's probably around there. And so we've really started to actually double down on stablecoins. And I am actually a firm believer, and I talk about this a lot at conferences, et cetera, that stablecoins are really one of the killer apps of crypto or blockchain technology. And I think I really started to notice this too. There more and more use cases have emerged, or value props, if you will. But we work with a number of developers there's a number of developers that work on Wormhole full time that are in, high inflationary countries. I think a good example is we have a lot of developers in Buenos Aires, for instance. And you give the option, hey, do you want your local fiat currency or do you want USDT? All of them, not one. There wasn't one person that chose their local fiat currency over USDT. And that was actually kind of like a pill moment for me, where I was like, oh, wow. We sometimes early on in crypto, you kind of struggle like, where is the tangible value, right? It was a lot of promise value. Where's the tangible value? And that was one of those pill moments where I was like, okay, stablecoins have a lot of value props and we can go over them on this call. But one of them is it's an inflationary hedge. It's like this geo arb. And I think that was a really cool moment for me. And since then, we've really just seen them go up and to the right in the data, not just like, more stablecoins are coming out. We're seeing more and more of our volume, more of the actual flow between chains be in stablecoins.
Yeah. It's so exciting. A lot of people, I love the Thanksgiving dinner reference because I'm giving that all the time to my family who's like asking me, like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you leaving these safe, comfortable jobs to go build? What is a stablecoin thing? And so I love that reference. I'll start to maybe frame Thanksgiving versus non-Thanksgiving explanations. But when you say volume, I'm just curious. One, incredible at 50% is in stablecoins. Are you saying volume from a total value standpoint or more of a transaction count standpoint?
Yeah, so when we think about volume on a single chain is typically much higher than volume between chains. So think about like a DEX on Solana. It does good. For instance, Uniswap actually is a better example. I think they've done over 3 trillion. I got to double check this number, but like that's a large number, but they've done a ton of volume on a single chain. Volume between chains is a little bit less. But when I think about the TAM for Wormhole, I think about something like Swift. I oftentimes think about them because that's where I want Wormhole to go and however long it takes us to get there. But that volume is, you're seeing money move in a 24-hour period to the tune of $4 to $5 trillion. And so that is money. That is, you could argue like stablecoin equivalents in some way, but that's a stretch of a comparison. That is the TAM that we are going after. And that is largely all money that people are using to spend, right? that people are getting paid in, like the actual fiat currencies. And so when I think of volume, that's where we're going. Today, Wormhole does some of the most volume in the industry, and we'll see. It depends on how the market's doing. Unfortunately, volumes and activity in crypto is very tied to the market, but it can be anywhere from 60 million in a 24-hour period to 250 million. So we'll see that much flow go between Solana, Base, Arbitrum, Mainnet. Do we insert your chain? We're almost connected to 40 plus. And so of that volume that's being sent between all those blockchains, I would say anywhere from 30 to 50% can be stable coins. And I over time, we've started to see that kind of go up and to the right. Earlier on, it used to be a lot of native tokens, right? A lot of people would send ETH back and forth, send Sol back and forth. They'd send WBTC back and forth, or governance tokens for protocols. And so now we're seeing those tokens kind of stay on those chains a little bit more. And instead of moving those tokens back and forth, keeping those tokens and actually just either swapping into a stablecoin and moving the stablecoin, or that's actually usually the exactly what happens. So we're seeing kind of that activity happen a lot more. Yeah, I mean, we're doubling down on stablecoins just given the fact that they are becoming more and more of our volume, excuse me.
If I'm really putting myself in the seat of the listener that I know that is listening to this, these are people who are interested in stablecoins. They want to learn more. They're probably getting their journey started or just want to go deeper into understanding how to think about Wormhole. And for them, like if you were to speak to that person who's not a Thanksgiving dinner table person, but more of like, hey, here's how you can think about us. And maybe if this touches the world of M0, even great, because we've been exploring M0 this season. And really using them as a reference point of like all the spokes or hubs that touch them. And I think what could be an interesting way to explain it to that person also is the Circle use case. You guys mentioned that you guys were thought partners in CCTP and how they built that and what that is even. Maybe just frame it up a little bit from what's actually going on with Wormhole behind the scenes when all that volume's going from one place to another.
Absolutely. So what I would say, the way I would think about this is, and I'll actually zoom out and talk a little bit about how institutions think about coming on chain, as you'll hear me use a little bit more. But how I would think about stablecoins and maybe interop a little bit more specifically, and maybe even more specifically Wormhole, is that Wormhole is critical infrastructure that every stablecoin needs to be successful. So you no longer can issue a stablecoin. So think about any stablecoin maybe you as a listener are interested in. They're just on one chain. To start, that's fine. But in a long term, they will not be competitive and they likely will not be successful if they stay on one chain. So Circle kind of proved this model over a couple years of just USDC building their own very centralized bridge. Circle controls everything, centralized bridge, because they realized that blockchains are a little bit different than banks. They're like these, or they're a lot different than banks, excuse me. But like, at least for this particular thought exercise, they're like these economic zones. Liquidity, users, a lot of them stay on one of these blockchains. And so it becomes on-chain. Don't think about Solana, don't think about Ethereum, don't think about Sui. On-chain becomes the total addressable market. It becomes the crypto market. And so if you are a stablecoin issuer, you're issuing on one chain. The critical technology that you would need next, I would argue, is like a core part of your stack. I think M0 would say the same thing, is the interop protocol that's going to make you go from one chain to all the chains. And I'll zoom out a little bit here. So Wormhole, we are an exclusive partner for BUIDL. So BlackRock issued a money market fund on chain. It's actually, I believe, the largest real world asset on chain today in terms of assets on chain. I believe it's in the 2 to 3 billion mark. And it's a money market. They use Wormhole exclusively. And the reason why is because institutional investors or just institutions more broadly, when they come into crypto, there's a number of reasons. Tokenization has a lot of reasons, right? There's fractionalization. You no longer potentially have to go through some broker, have minimums. You can have someone invest for $10 million or $10,000 instead of $500,000. Like, there's a lot of reasons for tokenization. We don't need to get into that. But another reason why is because they want to tap into the crypto market, right? It's a growing market of investors that exist across all these chains. So if a stablecoin issuer comes along and says, we're going to be a big stablecoin on Bearchain or Solana or Sui, that's great. But they definitely need to have plans to be on all of the chains if they're going to be successful. And that's why you look at M0, and M0 has kind of baked that in from the start. So we've been working really closely with them as a partner to make sure they're doing everything right from the beginning. And I'll give you one more example of how it wasn't done right and what happened. So USDC, again, just to use them as an example, because they were one of the earliest players here. What happened was they issued USDC on like Ethereum mainnet. And they said, crypto is, we want this to be permissionless. We want users to take USDC wherever they want to do it, wherever they want to take it, meaning whatever blockchain. And so what happens is there's a bunch of different bridging front ends, right? So think about just going to a website being like, I want USDC to go from Ethereum to Solana. I'm going to use this website that's this bridge uses this website, this bridge uses. What happens with that process is in 2022, you end up with 5 different versions of USDC on Solana. Horrible experience. If I'm a DEX, what do I build liquidity for? If I'm a user, which one do I use? Which one do all these DeFi apps accept? Which one have the best yield programs, etc.? And so what we learned from that and what Circle learned from that is, okay, we need to have our own native way in which USDC is going to go between these chains. So we can be on all the chains and it can be a good experience for users. So what we did with M0 is we said, hey, we're going to build a very, like from the start, be intentional about how we go to each of these chains. So M0 exists across all these chains. And one layer deeper, if you listeners are familiar with M0, is the stablecoin, but it's also a stablecoin launch pad, right? You can launch a stablecoin with M0. And so now what we're doing is you launch a stablecoin with M0, and because of Wormhole, you can be on all the connected chains day one. And so when you think about Wormhole, you can think about it as like stablecoin adjacent infrastructure. The stablecoins today are largely issued on one chain, but now we're moving into this world where they're going to be able to exist on all of them. And if you're a retail investor, you're an institution, your grandma at the Thanksgiving table, you don't care as much about what chain things are on. You just want to be on all of them. You want to be on chain. And that should mean all the chains, not just one.
It's beautiful. I love the way that you think about this so simply. Do you guys, when explaining this, Joao from M0, or excuse me, Luca and Greg from M0 described some of their business using like wholesale, global trade, distribution, like wholesale versus retail. Do you guys use any similar kind of naming conventions to help? I know you mentioned the banking system itself, or wire systems, like any helpful ways to think about this using examples that you use?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd like to think that we spend a lot of time taking what are pretty complex technical topics and trying
Super complex.
Trying to simplify them, right? Because we're moving into this era of crypto where it used to be almost a badge of honor to, talk as technically as possible and almost like do things that I feel like finance does a lot to your average person, which is use rhetoric that's almost designed to create a barrier of understanding that, like, don't worry, invest in the mutual fund, we'll, invest in these simple things, we'll do the rest. And here's this like barrier of rhetoric because you won't be able to understand it. I feel like that's what the finance industry became after a while. And as crypto is like almost like a wanting to be the counter example, I did used to feel like that a lot of the praise, this kind of like over textualizing, there's probably a word for this, but like making things over complex. So we do try a lot to simplify them, but I wouldn't say there's anything top of mind. I would say that to simplify things even further, I really think a lot about blockchains is a stretch of an analogy, but again, as like these systems that don't communicate with one another, largely like, maybe a bank. And Wormhole's simply the Swift. And another way to think about it is, like, I remember that USDC example I just gave, and if you're just tuning in now, like a long time ago, USDC had a problem where they permissionlessly let users take USDC wherever they wanted, and it created a bunch of different versions of USDC on all these different chains. It was kind of a disaster. And so now do this visualization exercise of opening the mobile app on your phone, going to your banking app specifically, and seeing, maybe, I don't know if you're in the US, seeing like USD, but 5 different versions that actually aren't fungible with one another. They're almost like in different accounts, right? That is like the user experience that existed not too long ago. And now what we're doing is we're saying there's going to be a unified way in which any stable coin is traveling between all these different banks, if you will, or these different distributed ledgers. And so there won't be multiple versions created. It is like the end game for stable coins, the UX around stable coins.
Yeah.
And so maybe that helps a little bit more in terms of a visualization exercise.
I got one. I got an attempt. It's almost like, and this is, a cash-based system, but it's almost as if you go to a merchant and you're paying cash and they're like, oh, I only accept nickels. It's like no pennies, no dimes, no quarters, no paper, just nickels. Our register only has like a nickel slot. And you're like, that's ridiculous because I have $1 and this coffee's $1, but I have 4 quarters. So you guys are sort of maybe the cash system of the cash register producer that says, hey, we're going to create all these different spaces and slots and just use this register, and like we work with all of them. Is that maybe not
Yes.
fully right?
Yes,
But
yes,
maybe.
yeah. It's a standardization of the process. And I think the difference with wormholes, or not the difference, but like one important thing to know about wormhole is I think a lot of people want to push standards forward. Wormhole is and sometimes pushing standards forward is kind of like a profit maximizing or regulatory mode or things like that. Wormhole is an open source public good, right? So stablecoins, the tech is open source. Anyone can pick it up and use it. The goal is for us is we want to provide a better way for stablecoins to transact. Actually, going beyond that, all assets to flow between all of crypto. So what we're attempting to do and what we are doing is we're creating a standard way in which all of the assets flow between all the blockchains. And so it's like a very foundational financial infrastructure. If you could think about the digital financial system that we largely exist in today, this is something they had to think about back then, right? All these banks are popping up all over the place. What is the flow of money between them? And those are the railroad tracks, or the payment standardization. If you're buying something with a nickel that only have $1, that payment standardization is kind of what we're doing exactly.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense to me maybe you can talk a little bit about how you were thinking about this in the early days of how you were. This is a very unique approach to commercializing your business, to making money. Like you gotta make money somewhere, and it's a very different structure and approach than a standard private for-profit company that's selling cash registers with this standard in place. You're instead saying almost like, hey, we believe in we want this merchant technology out in the world, and we're going to give you all this cash register that has this standard already in place and have this as a public good, or have it available as a public good. Walk us through. I'd be really curious. I know you have the M token and there's some stuff here. Like, how do you guys think about this business commercially and sustaining it commercially, and maybe how that's evolved over time, or how you came to that in the beginning? It's such a unique business structure.
For sure. And so just for context for folks listening, Wormhole does have an associated token. The token is called U. And the way in which our goal is to make Wormhole self-sustaining. So today, and I think we want to take a practical approach to a lot of these things, given everything we've seen in the industry over the years. We want it to decentralize as much as possible, but not at the expense of the protocol, right? So a lot of teams will decentralize super fast. They'll do it really broadly. And what happens is you have a huge slowdown. So the adoption actually stops. Like you're not able to gain as much adoption because decision-making is so spread out that it's hard to actually get things done. So today, Wormhole's actually secured by the guardians or validators, like most decentralized protocols. There's 19 fully doxed entities. Some of them are the largest staking companies in the space. One of them is actually Google Cloud, for instance. And so these validators vote on anything that happens in the Wormhole protocol. What we are also introducing is U token holders to be able to vote, and that what they can vote on will expand over time. What we're also doing with W is it's going to be the way in which we make this network self-sustaining, meaning how are you paying out open source developers that are building Wormhole to incentivize them to continue to do so, these various things. So the way in which we charge today is like quite simple. I'll cut straight to it. We do not want to add any friction towards what we are trying to solve, meaning as many assets flowing, as much standardization as possible to give developers and users the best experience. So we don't want to add any friction there. For instance, M is a good example. M uses Wormhole. We're core infrastructure for them. We're not charging M. There's no financial, hey, you guys have to pay X, Y, and Z. But what happens is Wormhole experiences network effects, right? So I used to work at DoorDash, so I think a lot about gig economy network effects. And so Wormhole, the more networks it connects to, the more assets that use it, the more applications that use those assets, you establish this like really systemic stickiness. And so the point of value accrual, once you have that, once I am a network that is not in this web of standardization and where all the actual activity is happening, think a new blockchain, someone launches a new blockchain, I will pay a lot of money to be a part of that network. I want to be where all the volume is. I want to be where all the activity is. I want to be where this standardization is. And so at that point, say, hey, a new network comes along, you can charge for, them coming into the network. You can charge for them staying in the network. That could be through staking W, right? Stake a certain amount of W to make sure that, you can stay on the network, stay in the network. That could be them purchasing with a cash purchase and that money flowing back to users, or sorry, W holders somehow. So that's really the model today. And the thing is that's step one for us. We've had a roadmap for 4 years and largely executed on a lot of it, but now we're starting to really think about thoughtful monetization. And the reason I hesitate here is because I don't think crypto does a great job of this today. And I think there's revenue is now just becoming a thing, right? It was kind of a joke in crypto these past couple of years of there's literally, it's like a zero revenue. You have these multiples on these tokens and they're not revenue generating businesses. I come from a place of you must generate revenue to survive, or at least before Wormhole. And so now we're kind of shifting into this. What does it look like at even volume? Think about a stable coin going between two chains. If I'm a user, I may pay 8 basis points so that transaction can happen faster, right? And then that fee actually goes back to token holders, right? This is the self-sustaining economic loop that we're building, and we're starting a lot of it with the kind of network onboarding, if you will. But there's all these value extraction points. It's just about doing it thoughtfully. So you're adding value to the asset issuer, like the stablecoin issuer, but also the W holder in this instance.
Yeah, I'm exploding with optimism and excitement in my own mind. I'm actually
love that.
My mind goes back to reading Read, Write, Own by Chris Dixon when that came out a year plus ago, and really feeling excited for his vision of what he was talking about when it comes to networks. And for me, it's when I hear you talk about this, and for those who haven't read that book, go check it out. It's a really interesting framework. But when I think about this incentive, really what I would call a modern incentive system, right now, our business, we're going through the incorporation process and giving people equity, figuring out what that means, and aligning incentives for our business. What you've essentially just described in my mind is the future of how to do that on chain in a way that's really interesting, and to get the not just the holders or the participants in the network to pay into it, but getting those that help stand it up infrastructurally, like those large staking providers that you're working with, get those folks also incentivized. It's a really interesting, you could have a whole podcast show just on that topic of companies doing that well, struggling to even know where to go next.
No, it's true. It's true. Economic incentives are hard, right? It's what governments spend a lot of their time doing. It's, taxes are
getting it wrong is the worst thing ever.
Taxes are a form of incentives, right? They're levers to get people to do certain things, truly. And of course, at the end of the day, you want to continue to fund the system, but how do you not do too much to where it's net negative and people leave, but you also don't want to do too little that you can't kind of keep the infrastructure up of a place and keep people happy long term, right? It's a delicate balance, and you're just applying that same thought to a very new industry. It's the same old story of economic incentives and how they drive behavior, but now we're applying it to a new technology, trying a lot of different things. And I think that the thing that we're trying to do is we move fast when we build things, but we want to move a little bit slower when it comes to rolling things out related to, let's say, revenue and token holders and governance. I'll bring up this point again. It's important that things are decentralized. I think we actually need government direction on what does decentralized mean, because I think that will help a lot of builders. Because if you decentralize too much, and my legal team will probably be a little upset at me for saying this, but if you decentralize too much, it is truly detrimental to the protocol. I've seen it happen multiple times, in that there's a beauty of giving all the power to the people, but then there's a reality of what is that? Have you seen that happen?
I'm just curious, just to make that concrete.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't want to. Here's the thing: is I work with a lot of the protocols where I've seen it happen, so I don't want to call any of them out explicitly. I think I will say it. Maybe I'll talk more broadly.
Okay.
There's and I get putting proof behind what you're talking about, but maybe I'll give some categories and people can look in them. But there's a top perp dex that a lot of people used for a long time, and they decentralized a lot. They didn't really have clear owners. When working with them, it can become pretty difficult. And then getting stuff through, getting stuff done takes a very long time. And guess what? Here's the thing. It's like, that's okay. That is actually in a vacuum, that is okay. But here's the thing is that if you're a token holder or you're an ecosystem participant, a validator, something in that ecosystem, it's still competitive. You have a perp dex that comes along that's, maybe less decentralized or waits a while to launch a token or something like that. They eat your lunch. This already happened. Like Hyperliquid just demolished these other perp dexes, right? So that's like one core example. I actually think there's another stablecoin that this happened to. The thing about this stablecoin is they're slow to make decisions, but they've kind of hit it's a little bit different in the sense that they've hit this critical mass, I guess you could say, or critical velocity in terms of they have a ton of issuance. So they're able to kind of keep that issuance high and a lot of adoption. But I think the PerpDex one is a really good example. Like whenever it's crypto is still so competitive, right? There's a lot of opportunities. So you have a lot of really smart people coming in and trying to build things and trying to win, which is good. That's how we get innovation. But in that world where you're the incumbent and the incumbent decentralizes too fast and it isn't able to move quick and be nimble anymore, you better believe you're going to get your lunch eaten every single time. So, folks, if you want to like a little bit more proof around this, go look into perp dexes, maybe pull up the top 10 in the past couple of years and look at charts there. But I see it a lot, especially working with these teams. And so we are going to be decentralized. We are decentralized today. The validators make all the core decisions, but that's 19 as opposed to a lot. And then we have a delegate system. So where a lot of the token holders go, or token voting goes to these delegates that token holders decide on. So you have a smaller set of actual voters.
Yeah. It seems like we're trying to find, this isn't a black or white thing. I think we talk about this idea of a spectrum when it comes to custody and like the idea of custody, who holds your keys kind of thing. Like it's not a black or white thing. There's a ton of considerations. In decentralization of a company or technology is similar based on how you're describing it. Is like, one side or the other is probably bad. Somewhere in the middle is just to be thoughtful around it based on what you're wanting to optimize for is really interesting. Can you give us I want to just really hone in specifically on stablecoins themselves.
Yeah.
You mentioned doing that potentially incorrectly with a stablecoin issuer or asset specifically that fell into that trap. And when I'm thinking about Wormhole, it would be really helpful to contextualize using some of these partners we've talked about, if possible, as a reference point, and maybe the M token as well as a mechanism of incentive alignment. If you have, whether it's BlackRock, whether it's M, whether it's a company that's using these things together, kind of an end-to-end story or an end-to-end use case. Maybe there aren't as many of them in the world that you wish yet, but one that you're like, damn, that's as close as I've seen to getting as close as we can to the full scope here, where everyone's at the table, everyone's playing their part, the incentives look great. Let's do more of that. What do you think of when you think of that?
Absolutely. I'll give two concrete examples. I did want to just touch on the previous point though, just to finish us out. And if there's any Gen Z listeners, maybe this term will relate more, but I think crypto is going through its practical era. So it's this period of time where we say, we're moving from maximalism a little bit to saying what is too much decentralization? What is too little decentralization? And I think the bar used to be, thousands of validators spread across the world, permissionless, anyone can do it, run it on a laptop, the more, the better. And then you have to figure out all the problems that comes with that, which is in large part scaling. How do you make it fast so a future financial system can actually adopt it, or it can become the future financial system? That is where we started a few years ago. Now where we're going is we're saying, where can we make trade-offs so we can actually get adoption? Where can we maybe say, this is better, still better than the financial system today, maybe just to hone in specifically on something in terms of decentralization, right? It's more decentralized, but it's not decentralized as maybe what wasn't working as well and wasn't getting us as much adoption. I think a good example of this, or questionable example, you can maybe still say, because there's a lot of opinions on it, is Hyperliquid, right? Hyperliquid is an exchange, a perpdex on chain, and it doesn't have that many validators, but it's getting great adoption. And we're starting to see more of these chains. Another chain is called Fogo, doing the same thing, right? It's a smaller validator set, that can really adopt a future financial system, but it's nowhere near what Ethereum is, right? Nowhere near what Ethereum is. So in terms of decentralization, so this practical era is going to be interesting. I do think we need some guidance from regulators on like what is decentralized, right? Like I think a lot of people talk about the 20% rule, or it's like 19.9 something percent, like making sure no one has over that amount of control. So that could be like a 6-party multisig, right? So those questions I think are going to be important throughout the rest of the year. But to speak specifically to your question, Drew, there's 2 use cases that come to mind. One, I'll give you, this one was about like a year ago. So USDS, if you're not familiar, USDS is formerly known as DAI, formerly known, and the company's MakerDAO, or the DAO's MakerDAO, and now it's Sky. So USDS, formerly known as DAI, exists primarily on Ethereum mainnet. I think it's 5 billion plus in issuance. I don't know the exact numbers today, but what they wanted was, they said, hey, we want to go to the next chain. We want to go where the next large amount of economic activity is happening. And if anyone's been paying attention for the past year and a half, that's a lot of it's been on Solana. And so they approached us and they said, hey, we want to go to Solana and we want to get a lot of adoption for USDS there. And we want it to be almost like this seamless pathway between Solana and Ethereum. So what we did is we launched NTT. So you'll hear me say NTT a lot. It's that standard that stablecoins use to just burn and mint between chains. So think about an accounting system. You're just saying, Drew sent Robinson, 10 USDS, and making sure it can go between 2 chains and do it decentralized. So long story short, or long story long, we worked with the team to issue USDS on Solana. We had a good incentive campaign. I think we had 60 mil in USDS go to Solana within a 24-hour period, something about around those lines. And then when you think about the user, so let's zoom up. We're talking software level. It's hard to conceptualize. There is a widget on a page, right? You go to a website, you have a widget, and then you have USDS in a wallet. And if you want it on Ethereum, you click a button, it goes to Ethereum. If you want it on Solana, click a button, it goes to Solana. There's a tiny fee associated with that, of course, but that is kind of like the fully baked. In the background, you're not making sacrifices around decentralization, like trustless as can be, very decentralized, very secure. You've got 2 of the biggest, hottest chains, and you don't have multiple versions, right? That we gone beyond that. Now teams are taking a tactful approach about how they're doing it, instead of saying, let's just let it be permissionless, whoever should do it. And so when you zoom all the way up, you kind of can see if I go to this website, I have a box and I can just click, I want it on Ethereum, I have it on Ethereum. I want it on Solana, I have it on Solana. And then you can use it in a DeFi app on Solana. You can use it in Athena on mainnet, and you can make your choice that way. And what we have too is M0 is the same thing. We've gone, except we're on more chains than Solana and Ethereum, right? You go to portalbridge.com. It's one of the most popular applications built on Wormhole, and you can click and put your M wherever you want to, and you can be assured that there's not another version, or you're not creating another version. All of the M on that chain is going to be fungible. So we're kind of going from like the lower level of the accounting system between blockchains all the way up to the app where I just type in a website and I can make my M go between blockchains as I want.
When you think of companies that people might think of, as we enter this layer of, okay, this is making sense. I get this whole interoperability problem. I can understand why solving that as seamlessly as possible makes sense. Can you break down a little bit the different approaches that other companies or other partners are taking? Specifically, like if you ever come across people that are like, oh, are you competitive to XYZ? They're like, well, sort of, but we do this differently. Or who's typically in this? I'll be the first to admit, I haven't spent a ton of time navigating the interoperability stack or options. I know a company that comes to mind is Halliday, for example, who's kind of in this world. Like, give me a sense of the usual suspects, if you will, here.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of like aggregation type companies that do parts of what we do, but I would say we're the lowest level, meaning like we're at the blockchain level doing, build something that took 4 years, not the kind of aggregation level. So there's really 2 main players that are racing to do the standard. It's us and a team called Layer Zero. The main differences, I would say, between the two is that Wormhole prioritizes security, meaning we built our own security mechanism. It's one of the reasons that BlackRock and Securitize decided let's move forward with Wormhole because it's so secure. We built our own system. We have our own internal security team. We've got our own proactive security features, et cetera, et cetera. You can go on our website and look more about what we do. And then Layer Zero oftentimes gets used for some lower value assets, right? So a lot, maybe meme coins and things like that, because what they do is they outsource the security. So they say, they didn't build the security system and they don't want to build the security system. They want you to bring your own. But the reality is a lot of asset issuers don't bring their own security system, right? It's not something they want to do. They want their partner to do that. And so what we find is you move further up towards the value stack of assets, Wormholes works with more and more of them. And stablecoins are of high value. I would say the only thing right now you could argue of putting more value on is besides like large native gas tokens, like for instance, Polygon could use Wormhole, is RWA. So meaning we're getting into the BlackRock conversation, right? So as you move up that value curve of assets, Wormhole gets used more. And again, we lead the industry in terms of assets issued multi-chain, right? I think it's over probably 5,000 at this point. So we do the meme coins as well. You could do it permissionlessly. You don't have to talk to any Wormhole contributor. But we do really well as you move up here because we built the security system. Layer Zero outsources it. So at the end of the day, you end up with at most a 5-party multi-sig. And what I mean by that is usually you need 3 people or 3 entities to say yes to something out of 5 in order for it to be true. So if 3 of those people get compromised in some way, and it's happened before, it happened to multi-chain, another bridge, the Chinese government got involved. You can look it up online, but effectively the bridge was rugged and that affects your entire stablecoin. It really does. So effectively most of their security systems end up being 5-party multi-sigs because asset issuers and app builders don't want to build their own security. That's most of the time, that's why they're working with you as a provider and a partner. So that's the main difference.
Quick question. Yeah. When does that make sense? I'm sure there's a counter argument to this a little bit. I'm imagining there's a case in the world where both do really well differently, and it's really just a matter of which bucket do you fall in and what do you require? Yeah. My mind is immediately going into, again, the custody debate of custodial, non-custodial. It sounds like if I'm distilling this, Wormhole is more of a, for lack of a better comparison, more on the non-custodial side of that debate, and something like Layer Zero might be, if you really look under the hood, more on the custodial side or leaning that way. When in your mind are there requirements for when custodial, like an on-prem bank use case or something, when that becomes required, or any times where you're oh yeah, you got to go this way or that way, where that's black and white in your mind?
Yeah, I'll try. I want to be as intellectually honest here as I can be. So Wormhole also can outsource the security with the way we built the model. So you can use our Guardian network or you can bring your own. So for what it's worth, they almost become commoditized at the end of the day, meaning they could both be viewed as very similar. And then the value becomes what are the tools that are built on top of them? And what is the distribution that's built on top of them? So Portal Bridge is a good example for Wormhole. Maybe I would say when less decentralization matters or could be used, if to play devil's advocate of myself, is if someone wanted to build a centralized bridge, like Circle did do that, right? They did do that. So you could have a single signer that is the asset issuer, and that's the effectively the gatekeeper of anything going cross chain. You could have a low value meme coin, like I said, why it typically works then, where they don't really care that much about decentralization. So they're going to say, whatever you have is fine. I just want to race to market and get this thing out. So I'd say those 2 use cases are typically where you could see that making a bit more sense. But I think the value for us is that we can do that too. But the moat for us is that we also own the security. And so that's why it becomes a pretty easy conversation when you're talking about more of these high value assets.
Yeah. Are there benefits or downsides to this security conversation when it comes to cost or speed, or just the things that make people like Circle when they architected CCTP? And maybe I'd love also to hear your thoughts on where that lives in this centralized regulated model. They built that themselves. For those who don't know, that was a Herculean effort in the industry to accomplish what you're describing from an interoperability standpoint. But like you said, they're on the regulated, centralized side of that spectrum. Yeah, what do you see as obviously that brings them control. What are the other benefits or reasons why the next Circle would do it that way versus just doing it with you guys in this more like shared security, or I don't even know what to call it. I know non-custodial is the wrong term, but just are there trade-offs that they're making by not going the Circle route, if you will?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is like Circle's undoubtedly getting into the money transmission game. So that's a whole, like, it's one thing to build it, right? So you have to look at yourself as an organization. It's like, can I build this? The next thing is like, can I sit comfortably with the unknown risks of being a money transmitter, right? And so and whatever comes with that. So, that might be going out on a limb to just say that definitively, but I don't see how they wouldn't be classified as that, given that there's only one signer. The thing I'll say is there is no need. So Circle built CCTP because there was no solution at the time. NTT, what Wormhole has at standard, is literally CCTP because we ideated with them, literally CCTP for any asset. So if, for instance, you could have the same burn and mint contracts, very similar that CCTP has, and then put your own single signer in there, and you have your bespoke, CCTP. Like you actually can, if you wanted to, you can build your own. And for instance, we talked with M0 about them being a signer. So if you took out the Guardian network, M0 being a signer in the NTT contracts is literally CCTP, which is crazy. But why would you, let's say that signer got compromised for any
like
sort
an
of reason.
expensive effort for not much upside. And
Yeah, that's for sure. And you could also double it up. You double the security. So you need both Wormhole to verify a message and M0. That hits a contract that mints the whatever I sent to Drew in the example before. So you need 2 of 2. So that actually adds security. So you can get more secure. But just to answer your question about maybe the other trade-offs too, for the user, I think it's important. So we've done a lot of work solving speed. So Wormhole used to be beholden in any protocol in the interop space used to be beholden to finality. Finality is like what sort of certainty is needed to guarantee a transaction on a given chain. Ethereum took 15 minutes. It still does, I think. But they're working on a lot of stuff to make that better. But Wormhole today, it used to be beholden to that finality. Now Wormhole can front any finality, meaning that we don't have to wait for it and still give the guarantees that you get your asset. And there's a whole insurance type protocol there that we can get into another time. So it's really fast. And why I say that is because if you want to send an asset from one chain to another, today you could do it in 6 seconds. Or another route you could take is you do it via centralized exchange. So let's think about what that process looks like. I got my assets in a wallet. Let's say I don't have a centralized exchange yet or account. I have to get an account. I have to KYC. That may take a few days. Then I have to load money on. That may take a few more days. But let's say I do have an account. So I send it to my KYC'd account. Then I have to hope that they have support for the other blockchain. So then I send it to the wallet of the other blockchain, right? So it becomes this very cumbersome process where you kind of go off to on-chain, on-chain to off-chain, and then on-chain back to off-chain. And so you're going from 6 seconds to multiple different websites, different wallets, and much slower, right? So probably more expensive because you have to pay the transfer transaction here. You likely have to pay some sort of transaction on centralized exchange and back down. So there's developer benefits or asset issuer benefits like M0. You can literally have your own CCTP today. And there are benefits to the user for not having to go through a centralized exchange. Some users would say the benefit to them is like, I don't want a KYC. There are people that don't want to have multiple centralized exchanges or avoid them entirely, but I'm a little bit more practical and I focus more on the problem set of it's expensive and it takes longer. And at the end of the day, those little fees, that time makes a difference.
Yeah. The example I always think about, I mean, such an interesting framework. We are very, very in the US at least, and I know increasingly around the world, I think used to these platforms that are centralized ledgers, essentially, that are just centralized, regulated, custodial ecosystems moving and transferring ledgers around just like a bank would. And in some ways, it is really banking just with a little wrapper on top of it. And you can think of Coinbase that way, Cash App that way. Anyone who's in that sort of MTL position has kind of been in that position, and there historically, I think, have been incredible user experiences because of that. I can send you, if we both use Coinbase, USDC or any asset instantly and in some ways for free because we're both on Coinbase and technically the money doesn't really need to move. And so historically, the centralized model I've seen really dominate for that reason. What you're saying is, from how I'm receiving this, is Wormhole has built the insurance. I know there's a lot of complexity and I'm oversimplifying it, But that sort of insurance float system that you've created, it sounds like has solved for that nuance or the complexity of getting funds instantly and almost doing that reconciliation process on the back end that a centralized ledger would be doing. But you're saying that you can do this as a service in a very like secure way that doesn't involve forcing users into this position of all the downsides that come with the regulated model.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 50% of our flow today moving through this protocol that can give you 6-second transfers. And maybe I would think about it. I'll give like one kind of high level data point. More and more like DEX volume, on-chain DEX volume is increasing in relation to where it was previously, considering market and everything, to centralized exchange volume. So, and then the other thing I would think about, just more of an anecdote, if centralized exchanges thought all the value was going to accrue there, and don't get me wrong, they're the behemoths in the industry today, but why would all of them launch a chain? All of them have a chain. Coinbase has Base, BNB has BNB chain, and they have another one, OPBNB. Kraken has Inc. Bybit has Mantle. OKX has XLayer. Like they're launching chains because they realize, I mean, number one, it's defensive, don't get me wrong, but number two, they realize that no matter what, there's going to be a transition to more and more activity happening on chain, especially as we solve a lot of these user experience issues and throughput and scaling issues. And so like there's follow the data, follow the actions being taken, and we're seeing more things happening on chain.
It seems like you guys are positioned perfectly to follow the rise of that tide as that, I'm assuming that as chains grow, as the ecosystem
good
grows,
for business.
It's good for business, right? What is the as we close here, what are the key conversations that get you most excited moving forward? I know you guys are growing really quickly and working with a lot of groups like M0. What would be your invitation or the call to action for someone who would be listening to this that falls in a bucket of like, if you are this way or if you're thinking this way, shoot me a DM on Twitter or like shoot me an email, like let's talk because this is who we're building for. Who would that be?
Yeah, I would say in the spirit of this podcast as well, if you're doing anything stablecoin adjacent, we can make it multi-chain. And we have all our tech is open source. So I could sit here and say, just go to our website, all the docs. We spend a lot of time and money in making the docs as easy as possible. But I think one of the things we also do is we act as consultants because multi-chain is difficult. You're building across usually 5 different virtual machines, different user bases, communities, on-chain economies. So like if you are issuing an asset or building multi-chain, feel free to DM me on Twitter or reach out to DM the Wormhole Twitter or go to our website. There's multiple avenues to get in touch. I try to make it as easy as possible, but anything multi-chains, especially assets, especially stablecoins.
Amazing. And last question, we're going to have to do a part 2 to this because I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
This has been great.
What would be, for the remainder of the year, one of the things that from either the product side or the partnership side or things that get you most excited about that the world may not know about yet or may not be paying attention to, what would that be for maybe both Wormhole specifically in your mind, like stuff that you guys are doing, and then 2 and separately, just the landscape of stablecoins, like what's just getting you excited there?
Maybe I'm going to be a little counter to this. So I think crypto has done a really good job of like painting the vision of what's exciting and what's to come. And maybe the argument I would say is like, I'm excited for us to be more boring and practical. I think a lot of like our direction, especially at Wormhole from leadership, is doubling down on being practical about adoption, being practical about the things that matter instead of like trying to build the next generation of protocols. I think what tooling is, there'll always be stuff that's new, but tooling is in a good place. We need to mature a lot of it. We need to gain adoption. We need to make sure all on and off ramps for stables are good. Stables can flow seamlessly between blockchains. I can go on Uber and pay in USDC. I can go on DoorDash and pay in USDT, right? Like that to me is what I'm excited about, and what I'm beating the drum on is no more pontificating about what could be and what's to come. There's always room for that, and I still do it, don't get me wrong. But I'd say like where I want to drive emphasis towards is just really having serious conversations with the PayPals of the world and the Robinhoods, et cetera, about what it looks like for us in our daily lives to start using stable coins, and not just the USDCs and USDTs of the world, but the M's, the stable coins that launch with M0 and on all of the other ones that are coming out, right? And so that to me is what I'm excited about. This, like, again, I'll just finish with this era of practicality, crypto being more practical and less pie in the sky.
It's incredible. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been really great. I love the practical era. I think it's something that stable coins, something personally, just seriously, I've really struggled working in this industry. I've worked in crypto for many, many years, and it's something that I've really felt like I've longed for, just the practical era. And I do think that with what stablecoins are doing, how they're becoming practically used in the world for dollar access or whatever the use case is that gets people going, that's what's happening. It's like it's practically just happening. And there is a ton of stuff to do. Existing companies who've been poking their heads around for 5+ years, serious players that are actually starting to push go on things. So I love the posture you have. And yeah, just thanks again for your time. We'll have to do it again.
Looking forward to it, Drew. Thank you for having me on.